20.
Stage 1 is at liftoff pressures.
15.
Falcon 9 is configured for flight.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. Falcon 9. GC post launch pad operations to secure the pad on pad editing.
GC copies, Wilco.
T plus 1 minute and 17 seconds into flight, Falcon 9 approaching max Q. You've heard the call out, MVAC-D chilling. We're now getting the second stage engine ready for ignition. Several activities coming up here very shortly. At T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds, we expect main engine cutoff, followed immediately by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. Right after that, the first stage will begin the first of 3 burns to return us back to the Pacific Ocean to the drone ship parked offshore about 300 kilometers downrange. Coming up on MECO.
We have MECO. We have that back ignition.
T plus 2 minutes and 47 seconds into flight. We've had successful stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. And as you can see, we've also relit 3 of the engines on the first stage to begin the sequence that will return it to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Boost back burn lasts about 30 seconds. And we have fairing separation. Had a brief view of the Iridium satellites as the fairing separated. Again, it's just before dawn as we head south over the Pacific Ocean, so we're not getting any sunlight. First stage boost back burn did complete. Fairing did successfully separate. We're waiting to hear the drone ship AOS, that's acquisition of signal. That indicates the drone ship is receiving telemetry from the first stage. Second stage propulsion continues to look nominal, coming up at T plus 4 minutes into flight. T plus 5 minutes into the flight of Falcon 9 carrying 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites. Next event in our timeline is in about 35 seconds. That'll be a second ignition of the Falcon 9 first stage, what we call the entry burn. This is a burn of 3 Merlin 1D engines that'll slow us down for the actual re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. The burn itself will last about 13 seconds. Meanwhile, second stage. Performance continues to look good. The trajectory is good. Engine parameters look good.
Stage 1 entry startup.
And you see the flare on the screen. We have startup. It looks like all 3 engines are up and running. Also, you can see silhouetted the grid fins did deploy earlier. They'll now be used to guide us as we enter the Earth's atmosphere. And we've had shutdown of the entry burn.
Stage 1 AFTS has saved.
The automated flight termination system, autonomous flight termination system, has saved on the first stage. We're coming up on T plus 7 minutes. Stage 1 is headed back to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Stage 2 still headed to its initial parking orbit. Shutdown of the second stage engine should be just over T plus 9 minutes into flight.
AOS.
Now we're getting ready for the landing burn of the first stage.
Landing burn start. Stage 1 landing successful.
Delta LS.
7.5 minutes into flight. You can hear from the applause. We lost the signal briefly, then it returned with the view of the first stage in that pre-dawn darkness, sitting on top of Just Read the Instructions. Out in the Pacific Ocean, a successful landing of the first stage. Meanwhile, the primary mission continuing, the second stage, 7 minutes and 54 seconds into flight, a little more than a minute left to go. Propulsion continues to look good on the second stage engine as we power to the low Earth parking orbit carrying the 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites.
Elciane. Zooming in on this fire here.
Stage 2 AFTS has saved.
T plus 8 minutes and 38 seconds into flight. We've heard the autonomous flight termination system has been saved on the second stage call. Second stage just about to go into Earth orbit.
Yes, Eco.
Call out of SECO. Second stage engine cutoff. We're waiting right now for a call out from guidance, nav, and control. They're looking at the orbit of the second stage. Right now it looks at the telemetry we're getting. It looks like we've got a good orbit. This is the parking orbit of the second stage. This is the first of 2 orbits we're headed to today. Looks like we've got a good one here. What's going to happen now is we're entering a coast phase. You might have heard coast phase entry call out just a moment ago. We're going to coast about halfway around the Earth, passing over the Antarctica Peninsula, come up over Africa. We'll relight the second stage engine very briefly, That'll get us into the final orbit from which we'll deploy the 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites. All of that's going to happen at about T plus 52 minutes. So right now, we're just past T plus 10 minutes into flight. We've had a good first stage landing after a great countdown and a liftoff. Second stage performance looked very good getting into low Earth orbit. And so we're now going to go through about a 41-minute coast period. So we're going to leave you an animation showing where the second stage of the Falcon 9 is as we're passing over various features on the Earth. We will resume live coverage of the upper stage mission and the separation of the Iridium-NEXT satellites at T plus 51 minutes after the launch. So about 41 minutes from now, we'll come back, show you the second stage, second burn, and then we'll look for the 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites and their separation. So with that, hang in there with us. We'll be back at T plus 51. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Mission 3 for our Iridium-NEXT satellite deployments. We're just past T plus 51 minutes since liftoff. We're coming up in less than a minute on reignition of the upper stage engine. This is a short burn of the MVAC-D engine lasting just about 4 seconds. That'll raise us to the circular altitude of 625 kilometers. Currently, on the view from space, we're using cold gas thrusters to help keep propellant settled at the bottom of the tank so that it's right on top of the turbopump when we spin it for ignition of the engine. So we're gonna wait right now for ignition of the engine, and then we'll come back following that with a view on how the orbit looks. We've got ignition and we have shutdown of the MVAC-D engine. As I mentioned, it's a very short burn. It does not take much to add a lot of energy to the orbit with the thrust of the second stage engine. What we're waiting to hear right now is what the orbit looks like. And we've heard the call out. Guidance, Navigation, and Control has announced a nominal orbit insertion. So we're through the second burn of the upper stage engine. As you can see on the screen right now, a little bit of what you're looking at, that is oxygen, icy oxygen. There's a nice view of the Iridium satellites. We're going to go through a period of about 5 minutes as we get the second stage pointed in the right direction, make sure all the attitude and rates are correct before we begin the 15-minute sequence of deploying Iridium satellites. Now that's going to occur over several ground stations. We're currently, as you can see from the orbit map, we're to the east of the southern tip of the African continent. We will cross over several ground stations. We'll try to bring you as many of the satellite deployments as we can. There may be delays during that period for confirming separation, so we'll bring it to you once we know what the data shows us. But for now, we're in a good orbit. We're lining up for deployment of Iridium, and we're going to come back with live coverage in just a few minutes as we begin the sequence of deploying the 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites. T plus 56 minutes, 4 seconds since a great liftoff of Falcon 9. The Falcon 9 second stage is in the desired orbit. The 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites are mounted on a dispenser on top of the second stage, and we're coming up on the deployment sequence. Over the next 15 minutes, we will separate 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites into the desired orbit. From this orbit, they will eventually raise themselves to their final orbit where they'll integrate into the constellation. So we expect in about half a minute, we should get deployment of the first satellite. The view of the satellites you see here, there are 10 satellites. They are in 2 stacks of 5. So we'll see some of the satellites deploy, others we won't. They're on the back side of the dispenser. They're not in view of the camera. So right now we're just counting down, waiting for the flight computer to transition to the deployment state to release the first Iridium-NEXT satellite.
First spacecraft deploy confirmed.
And we have confirmation. First spacecraft deployment is confirmed. I think we could see a little bit of motion there. That one was coming from the top of the stack, so it's kind of hard to see with the other satellites underneath it. Now, as a reminder, every 100 seconds we go through a sequence where we will deploy another satellite. So the first one went about 57 minutes and 10 seconds into flight. The next one ought to come up at T plus 58:49. So about 1 minute from now, we'll hopefully get a second view from space. Satellite 2 deployment also may be in view of the camera. As I reminded you earlier, we are transitioning between several ground stations to cover this time period, so we may not have continuous live coverage all the way through the sequence. But once we do reestablish contact, if we were to lose it, we'll let you know how things are going in space.
Second spacecraft deploy confirmed.
We have confirmation. Spacecraft number 2 has deployed. You can see it just moving off at the very top of the screen before the camera cut back. That's a view of the upper stage engine. For those who are wondering, that white lump that you see on the edge of the nozzle, that is solid oxygen. So if you can imagine the oxygen you breathe, not only is it cold enough to turn liquid, it's cold enough now in space to actually turn to liquid oxygen or solid oxygen. It's an oxygen ice. That's of no issue to the vehicle. You may see those chunks dislodge from time to time. They're very light and easily broken apart. We're about half a minute away from spacecraft number 3 being deployed. This deployment will not be in view. It's on the backside of the dispenser, so we should not expect to see anything drifting through the field of view.
Third spacecraft deploy confirmed.
Avionics confirms deployment of the 3rd satellite. So that's 3 out of 10. Do the math, 7 to go.
Expected other
Right now, another 100 seconds. We'll just go through it like clockwork. The second stage flight computer sending commands on 100-second intervals. We're working the first 5 satellites that are at the top of the stack. As I mentioned, there are 2 layers of Iridium-NEXT satellites, 5 on top, 5 below. The ones you can see best are the 5 that are on the bottom stack, closest to the camera on the payload attached fitting. The ones we're deploying right now are coming off the top of the stack. 3 of them are complete, 2 of them to go. Like y'all, we're waiting for avionics team to give us a call out that we have each of the 10 planned separations of the Iridium-NEXT satellites. Now, as a reminder, as we go through this 15-minute sequence, you can see on the animation, we are working our way up the East Africa coastline. We now have acquisition of signal in Dubai. So we're trying to cover the gap during this 15-minute period so that we've got continuous telemetry. We did drop out a little bit right after satellite 3, but fortunately we did get the confirmation before we dropped out that satellite had deployed. Coming up on deployment 4,
Fourth spacecraft deployed.
and there you get a great view of the 4th satellite deploying, just top dead center of the stack, in nice view of the payload attached fitting camera. Now, of course, with cameras on the 2nd stage, we bounce between engineering views. Many of the propulsion team, for example, need to take a look at the 2nd stage engine so they can assess its performance even when it's not running in the vacuum of space. And then we also bounce and look at the forward-looking camera to pick up the Iridium-NEXT satellite deployments. The upcoming deployment will be the 5th satellite. That'll be the last of the 5 at the very top of the stack. Then we'll start working on the next 5 that are on the bottom half of the dispenser that remains permanently attached to the Falcon 9. We're about 40 seconds away from that next deployment. And as a reminder, for the deployment that's coming up, this one is not expected to be in the field of view of the camera.
Fifth spacecraft deploy confirmed.
Avionics engineering confirms successful deployment of the 5th of the 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites. Sequence continues to be clocked out by the flight computer mounted on top of the 2nd stage, sending signals to the controller up on the payload attached fitting that then routes the separation signals to each of the 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites. So 5 down, 5 to go. Everything continues to look good at T plus 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 23 seconds.
Sixth spacecraft deploy confirmed.
And you had a great view. Now we're working on the lower half of the dispenser. The 6th satellite deployed. We could see it drifting away. A nice nominal release, not tipping it off, just moving it straight away from the dispenser. A great view from the payload attached fitting camera. Same time also on the daylight side of the Earth, We're getting some great views of the spacecraft and the Earth in the background. We're about 10 seconds away from the next planned deployment, the 7th satellite.
Seven spacecraft deployed confirmed.
It took a minute, but we've got confirmation. It appears we're getting some dropouts in telemetry. So the call was a little bit late, but number 7 is on its way. That takes us to about a minute from now for release of satellite number 8. Now, if we continue to get video coverage as we see right now, satellite, the 8th one that will be deployed, is on the backside. You cannot see it in that view, so I don't think we're going to be able to see separation. Coming up in about 5 seconds for the next deployment.
Eighth spacecraft deployed confirmed.
Again, you saw by our graphic the Falcon 9 symbol superimposed. We lost data, it looked like, for a few seconds from the second stage. Then we got it back over the next ground station, and we have confirmed the 8th satellite has deployed on time. 2 satellites to go. Coming up will be the 9th satellite to be deployed out of the 10. You may notice this one will be in view. If you saw earlier stenciled on the payload attach fitting, this is satellite. It's got number 10 on it, but it's the 9th one to be deployed. This is nominal. That's a result of how we number positions on the dispenser, not actual numbers of the Iridium satellites. Nice view of the 9th satellite awaiting deployment from the Falcon 9 second stage.
Ninth spacecraft deployed.
Beautiful view of deployment of the 9th of 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites. Gorgeous shot. You might have seen also some bright dots in the background. I believe those are some of the other Iridium satellites that were deployed just in the last several minutes. So essentially a long string of beads as we're moving away from the Falcon 9 second stage. So now we're down to 1 to go. We're 9 for 9. We're going for the 10th deployment. That'll come up at T plus 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 11 seconds, give or take a second. Now this satellite is not in view. It's on the back side of the dispenser, so we'll just have to watch it on telemetry. Great view showing the most recent Iridium satellite, as well as a couple of others in the background.
Final spacecraft deploy confirmed.
T plus 1 hour, 12 minutes, 17 seconds. Since a great liftoff, the 10th and final Iridium-NEXT satellite is deployed right on time. So we're 10 for 10. Again, a clean sweep of Iridium-NEXT satellite deployments in the desired final orbit. It's been a great morning. Countdown on time. We hit the instantaneous launch window of 1 second. First stage successfully landed on our drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Second stage got into both the low Earth parking orbit, then relit its engine halfway around the world, got into the desired final orbit, and if you stayed with us for the past 15 minutes, you saw the great series of deploying 10 Iridium-NEXT satellites. So that's going to bring an end to our webcast. There is, I'd like to say, a very nominal webcast for us. We'd like to thank our Iridium-NEXT customer, the Air Force, for range support, and our government licensing agency, the Federal Aviation Administration. Also invite you to follow us on social media, on our Twitter feed, as well as on Instagram, and of course on our internet webpage at spacex.com. We'd like to thank you for letting us share the 14th flight of Falcon 9 with you. We look forward in a couple of days to the 15th flight, and until that webcast, we're signing off, saying thank you and goodbye.